Welcome to Stories by Renee Rose Hawthorne, where sweet romance comes to life. Each episode, I'll be using AI narration to give life to clean, wholesome romances that span from contemporary small towns to magical fantasy realms. Whether you're folding laundry, taking a walk, or simply relaxing with your eyes closed, I hope these stories transport you to worlds where love blossoms in the most enchanting ways. So settle in, get comfortable, and allow yourself to be swept away by stories that warm the heart.
Purple Between, a sweet meet cute story by Renee Rose Hawthorne. The summer heat pulsed against Rio's skin as he stared at the expansive brick wall before him, each weathered surface breathing with decades of stories pressed into clay and mortar. The community center had approved his mural design after months of proposals and revisions, but now, faced with the blank canvas of aged brick, doubt crept in like shadows before dawn. The sketch in his hands seemed so much smaller compared to the 20-foot wall that stretched before him like an impossible dream made manifest. Rio adjusted his baseball cap, feeling the fabric damp with anticipation and morning humidity, and took a deep breath that tasted of concrete dust and distant jasmine. Just start. That was always the hardest part. The wall had been primed white last week, its surface smooth as porcelain, yet textured enough to hold paint like skin holds memory. His chalk outlines were already beginning to take shape. Abstract waves that would eventually flow into concrete images of the neighborhood's history, each line a promise waiting for color to give it voice. Rio's design celebrated the river that had shaped the town, with silhouettes of the people who'd built the community along its banks, their stories written in negative space and possibility. Rio checked his watch, the band warm against his wrist from the climbing sun. 9 in the morning, and the temperature was already climbing toward the realm of liquid heat that would make detailed work impossible. He had maybe 5 good hours before the heat would become unbearable, before paint would dry too quickly on his brush, and inspiration would wilt like flowers forgotten in summer sun. He uncapped a bottle of blue paint, cerulean mixed with just a whisper of ultramarine, and began working on the central flow of water that would connect all elements of the mural like a spine holds together a living body. The first brushstroke felt like diving into cool water. Rio lost himself in the rhythm of paint against brick, each sweep of his brush adding life to what had been merely concept. The blue flowed like liquid memory across the primed surface, and he could feel his shoulders relaxing, his breathing deepening as the wall began to speak back to him through color and form. 2 hours later, sweat beading along his hairline like morning dew, Rio stepped back to assess his progress. The blue undulation was taking shape, serpentine and alive, but something felt off about the transition between the abstract water and the silhouettes he'd begun to outline in charcoal whispers. He tilted his head, trying to pinpoint the issue, feeling the familiar ache of artistic uncertainty settle between his shoulder blades. It needs more purple. Rio turned, startled by the voice that seemed to emerge from the shimmering heat itself. A woman stood a few feet away, holding 2 iced coffees like offerings against the mounting temperature. She wore paint-splattered overalls over a white t-shirt that clung softly to her small frame, her dark hair pulled into a messy knot on top of her head, with tendrils escaping to frame her face in the humid air. Large sunglasses perched on her nose, but she pushed them up to rest on her head as their eyes met, revealing warm brown eyes flecked with gold that seemed to catch and hold the morning light. Her gaze was direct and warm, and something in Rio's chest shifted unexpectedly, a quickening like the first flutter of bird wings at dawn. She gestured with one of the coffees at his mural. In the transition area, to bridge the blue into those warmer tones you've sketched for the buildings. Otherwise, they'll feel disconnected. Rio looked back at the wall, seeing it through her suggestion. Surprised registered, as did the recognition that her vision clarified his own like sunlight breaking through morning mist. A gradient with purple undertones would tie the elements together perfectly, would create the visual conversation his composition needed. but he found his attention drawn back to her. The confidence in her posture, the artist's eye evident in her assessment, the way she stood with one hip cocked slightly, completely comfortable in her own skin despite offering unsolicited advice to a stranger. "I'm May, by the way." She held out one of the coffees, and Rio noticed the delicate strength in her hands, the faint stain of what might have been old paint under her fingernails. "I work at the cafe across the street. Been watching you since you started chalking yesterday." A slight blush colored her cheeks at the admission, rose blooming beneath golden skin. Rio accepted the coffee with a grateful nod, their fingers brushing briefly, a connection electric and warm that sent awareness shooting up his arm like summer lightning. Her skin was soft where it touched his, and he found himself reluctant to break the contact. "Rio, and thanks for this. It's what I needed." The iced coffee was perfect, cold and sweet with just enough caffeine to chase away the morning's doubt. He could taste vanilla and something else, something that spoke of genuine thoughtfulness. "The coffee or the suggestion?" she asked, a small smile playing at her lips, transforming her entire face from merely pretty to something luminous. "Both," he admitted, taking a long sip and feeling the cold liquid chase away the heat that had been building in his throat. "How did you know?" "About the purple, I mean." May's eyes returned to the wall, and Rio found himself studying her profile. The elegant line of her neck, the way her lashes cast small shadows on her cheeks, the subtle movement of her throat as she swallowed. "It's going to be beautiful," she said, no flattery in her tone, just quiet certainty that resonated in the humid air between them. When she turned back to him, he caught something in her expression, a flicker of shared understanding that felt oddly intimate, like recognition passing between old friends. Rio studied her, intrigued by the way she seemed to see not just what was on the wall, but what could be, what would be with the right touch, the right vision. There was something familiar about the confident way she assessed his work, yet something entirely new in how his pulse quickened under her gaze. He wanted to keep the conversation going. "Are you an artist?" "Used to be." She half shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both regret and acceptance. "Studied fine arts for 3 years before switching to business. Now I just make coffee art." "That counts." "Maybe." She checked her watch. "Break's over. Good luck with the purple." Before Rio could respond, before he could find words for the strange reluctance he felt at her departure, she was already walking away, her boots scuffing lightly against the pavement in a rhythm that seemed to echo in his chest. He turned back to the wall and took another sip of coffee, the taste somehow richer now, considering the space where blue needed to meet warm earth tones. Purple. Of course. The bridge between cool and warm, between water and earth, between what was and what could be. The next day, Rio arrived earlier, hoping to make significant progress before the worst of the heat descended like a heavy blanket over the town. The morning air still held traces of coolness, dew glittering on the grass, and he felt optimistic about the work ahead. To his surprise, May was already there, sitting on a weathered wooden bench with 2 iced coffees, sweating in the morning air, and a small paper bag that promised sustenance and thoughtfulness in equal measure. "Breakfast," she said by way of greeting, holding out the bag as he approached, and Rio caught the scent of fresh baking, butter and berries, and something warm that made his stomach remind him he'd forgotten to eat in his eagerness to begin work. "Blueberry scones," the purple reminded me. Rio grinned, feeling something light and warm unfurl in his chest at her thoughtfulness, at the way she'd connected his artistic need to something as simple and perfect as breakfast pastry. "The purple worked perfectly. Come see." They walked to the wall together, and Rio was acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way she moved with quiet grace, the faint scent of vanilla that seemed to cling to her hair, the anticipation radiating from her like heat shimmer. where the flowing blue water now transitioned seamlessly into the warmer tones through blended purple undertones. The composition had found its voice. It wasn't obvious, just enough to tie the elements together like the perfect note that resolves a musical phrase. Beautiful, May said appreciatively, her voice soft with genuine admiration. No excessive praise, no lengthy analysis, just simple recognition that somehow meant more than any critic's review could have. Thanks to your suggestion. Rio broke the scone in half and offered her a piece, their fingers brushing again as she accepted it, that same electric awareness shooting through him at the contact. The pastry was still warm, flaky, and sweet, with bursts of tart blueberry that exploded across his tongue. So why'd you stop? With art, I mean. May took the scone and considered it before answering, and Rio found himself studying the thoughtful expression that crossed her features, the way she seemed to weigh words like a painter considering colors. Didn't think I could make a living. Practical concerns won out. She took a bite, brushing crumbs from her fingers with movements that were somehow both efficient and graceful. But I miss it. Rio nodded, understanding flooding through him like paint spreading across wet paper. This is my first paid mural. Been doing graphic design to pay rent, painting on the side. Is it strange? She asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity. Having your art so public? Terrifying. Everyone will see the mistakes. I don't see any mistakes. She scanned the wall with the eye of someone who understood the language of color and composition. Just possibilities. They ate in comfortable silence, watching early morning dog walkers pass by on their daily rituals. Some stopped to admire the progress on the mural, offering smiles or nods of approval that felt like small blessings. Rio found himself stealing glances at May, noting the way she observed the world with an artist's attention to detail, how she seemed to find beauty in the mundane choreography of morning life. I should get to work, Rio said finally, dusting off his hands and feeling the familiar pull of the wall calling him back to creation. Thanks for breakfast. I was thinking, May said, hesitating in a way that made Rio's pulse quicken with anticipation. I have the day off. If you wanted any help? Rio blinked in surprise, feeling joy bloom inside him. You want to help? Only if you want it, she clarified. He could see the vulnerability beneath her confident exterior, the fear of overstepping that he recognized in himself. I understand if this is your project. Just thought I could be useful for the background sections. Rio considered the expansive wall, the detailed design that stretched before him like a mountain to be climbed, and the relentless sun already climbing higher, promising heat that would make the afternoon a battle against time and temperature. He'd been worried about finishing on schedule. That would be amazing, if you're sure. Wouldn't have offered if I wasn't sure, May said, her directness refreshing like cool water after the tentative dance of politeness. I'll head home and change into something I can paint in. I have extra shirts, Rio offered, nodding toward his supply cart loaded with brushes and paint containers and the detritus of artistic ambition. And plenty of brushes. 30 minutes later, May returned in the same paint-splattered overalls, but had traded her white shirt for one of Rio's oversized tees, a faded blue thing that had seen countless painting sessions. She tied a knot at her waist to keep it from drowning her small frame, and Rio found himself distracted by the glimpse of skin the adjustment revealed. By the way, his shirt looked different on her body, transformed into something more beautiful than it had ever been on him. Without preamble, she picked up a brush and looked at him expectantly, ready to work. Looking at her, he felt a rightness, like a key finding its lock. What section needs filling? Reining in his thoughts about her, Rio showed her the building silhouettes he'd outlined in charcoal whispers. He discussed the color scheme and technique while trying not to notice the way she listened with her whole body, leaning slightly toward him. She asked practical questions that revealed her training, her understanding of how color worked with light and shadow. When he finished, she nodded once and got to work with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her element. They painted side by side as the morning dissolved into afternoon. Their brushes moved in complementary rhythms across the warming brick. Rio was impressed by her steady hand and attention to detail, the way she seemed to understand instinctively what each section needed. She worked with quiet confidence, and he found himself relaxing into the shared rhythm of creation. The sun climbed higher, pressing heat against their backs like a warm hand, and Rio became acutely aware of May's presence beside him, the soft sound of her breathing as she concentrated, the way she occasionally hummed under her breath when she was particularly absorbed in her work, the graceful economy of her movements as she dipped her brush and applied paint with careful precision. When she reached up to work on higher sections, he caught glimpses of the smooth skin, noticed the small freckle just below her left ear, found himself fighting the urge to reach out and tuck the strand of hair that kept escaping from her ponytail. The heat built around them like a living thing, but it felt different now, wrapping them in their own private world where nothing existed but color and promise. And his growing awareness that something was happening between them that had nothing to do with the mural and everything to do with the way their hands sometimes brushed when reaching for the same color. By mid-afternoon, sweat had begun to bead along their foreheads, and the small of Rio's back felt damp with exertion. They'd made remarkable progress. The central flowing water was now bordered by buildings and landscapes that told the story of the riverside community in layers of color and meaning. Rio had begun adding the human silhouettes that would populate the town, figures of various sizes representing the diverse community, each one a life, a story, a dream made visible in paint and shadow. "These people," May said during a water break, gesturing to the silhouettes with paint-stained fingers while she pressed the cold water bottle against her neck in a gesture that made Rio's throat tighten with unexpected desire. "They feel alive somehow, even without faces." Rio smiled, pleased by her observation, by the way she saw not just technique, but heart in his work. "That's what I was hoping for. Everyone who passes can imagine themselves in the mural." "Smart," she said, and then, after a moment's hesitation, "Would you mind if I worked on some of them?" Rio handed her a smaller brush. "Go for it." Together, they added life to the community in the mural. Children playing with shadows that suggested laughter and movement. Elders sitting on benches with the weight of wisdom in their postures. Workers and dreamers. Families and individuals. Each silhouette a poem written in negative space. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across their work that seemed to dance and shift with each passing cloud. And Rio realized they'd nearly completed what would have taken him 2 more days alone. But more than that, he realized he didn't want this to end. Not the mural, not this shared space of creation, not the way May's presence seemed to make colors more vivid and ideas more endless. "We make a good team," he said, stepping back to take in the full effect, though he found himself studying her profile instead of the mural. The focused intensity in her eyes that reminded him of his own when he was lost in creative flow. The slight smile that appeared when she was satisfied with a section. The way the evening light caught in her dark hair like captured fireflies, turning ordinary brown into something rich and complex. She smiled, but didn't say anything, seeming content in her work. Rio felt his chest tighten with something that was part gratitude, part longing, part recognition of something rare and precious unfolding between them like paint spreading across wet canvas. The scent of acrylic paint mingled with the sweetness of the jasmine growing along the community center wall, creating a symphony that would forever remind him of this day, this moment, this woman. Her presence had transformed solitary creation into something more meaningful. His fingers, stained with blues and purples and the warm earth tones of community and belonging, flexed unconsciously at his side, as if trying to hold on to the sensation of brush against brick, of creation flowing through him like breath. He loved painting alongside her and didn't want the moment to end, didn't want to return to the solitary practice of art when he had discovered how much richer it could be when shared with someone who understood the language of color and light and the patient devotion required to transform vision into reality. Rio cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how the heat seemed to shimmer in the small space between them like visible desire. It needed another perspective. Your perspective. His voice came out lower than he intended, almost reverberating in the small space between them. May turned to him. Her eyes widened and a smile touched the corners of her lips. Tucking her paintbrush behind her ear, she left a small streak of crimson against her skin. Thank you for letting me be part of it. I should be thanking you. The sleeve of his shirt brushed against her arm as he shifted his weight, and he found himself reluctant to move away from the warmth of her skin that seemed to burn through the thin fabric. His heart drummed against his ribs, and he could smell the faint vanilla scent that seemed to cling to her hair, mixing with the salt of honest sweat and the lingering sweetness of jasmine on the evening air. Listen, he said, his voice catching slightly on the words that felt too important to mess up. The community center is hosting a small reception when the mural is finished. Would you want to come? As my guest? He hesitated, then added, feeling brave and terrified in equal measure. Or maybe we could get dinner after. Just the two of us. May hesitated before answering, and Rio felt his heart suspend its beating, felt time stretch like paint drying in summer heat. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain, like a brush finding its perfect stroke. I'd like that. Both, actually. The reception and dinner. A slow smile spread across Rio's face, matching the warmth that had settled in his chest, like paint finding its perfect surface. Great. It's a date, then. Without thinking, Rio reached out and gently wiped the stray paint away with his thumb, feeling the soft warmth of her skin, the way she went still at his touch, her lips parting slightly. Paint, he explained, his voice a low whisper. Hazard of the job, she replied, and he could feel her breath against his wrist, warm and sweet, and making him think of all the ways two people could paint pictures together that had nothing to do with walls. After a moment of stillness, they packed up supplies in the fading light. Rio found himself looking forward to tomorrow for reasons far beyond the mural. He watched as May cleaned a brush with movements that were precise and thoughtful, just like her suggestions, just like her art, just like everything about her that seemed designed to complement his own rough edges and transform them into something more beautiful than he had ever been alone. Same time tomorrow? May nodded, a smile warming her eyes like the first stroke of paint on fresh canvas, like all the promises that dawn carries in its golden light. Same time. Walking home as twilight settled over the town like a soft blanket woven from lavender shadows and rose gold light, Rio thought about the magic that happens when two people connect. Like blue meeting earth tones, brought together by the perfect shade of purple, like separate colors bleeding into each other on wet paper to create something neither could have achieved alone. Like the recognition that some of the most beautiful art happens not in solitude, but in the tender space between two hearts, painting the same vision of hope across walls that will outlast the summer heat and speak of love for generations to come.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Stories from Renee Rose Hawthorne. I hope this tale brought a little warmth and romance to your day. If you enjoyed what you heard and would like to experience more of my clean, heartwarming love stories, you will find novellas and short story collections on Amazon. Until next time, when I'll have another sweet romance to share with you, this is Renee Rose Hawthorne wishing you love, joy, and happy endings wherever you go.